What's up everybody, welcome back to the channel and another Outriders video. Back in vanilla I made a build for Trickster which was essentially like maximum deception, using only deception skills to basically turn the Trickster into a spellcaster of sorts that just sits in the back and, you know, cast your skills on cooldown as soon as you can before moving into a new area. Basically, the problem is I essentially try to turn every single class into pyromancer, and it's a real fucking disease, and I don't know what to do about it. But I mean, all jokes aside, the idea for me with this build was that when you play Trickster, or at least firepower Trickster, then it tends to be a very intense experience because you have to hunt the prey behind enemies, and you kind of have to snapshot your twisted rounds up and all of that, and it's kind of like a very sweaty way of playing Trickster. At least for me, I'm kind of more like a more laid back guy, and I just want to cast my skills and essentially move through each area. And so that to me was, I wanted to build the opposite of that. I wanted to build something with Trickster that was kind of like a speedrun pyro, kind of like cold snap technomancer, that will allow you to control the arena, to control the enemies, and essentially have them either die very slowly to, you know, status or something like that, or getting repeatedly hit by Venator's Knife, while sitting in the relative protectiveness that is the slow trap, and essentially, you know, affording that same utility to my teammates. So in a solo, you know, scenario, of course, you know, the slow trap becomes like just an area for you to put down and fight from any enemies that come in there. You can very easily dispatch with your weapons, or hitting them with a Venator's Knife, or, you know, a Time Rift or anything like that. And when you start playing this build in groups, then essentially you become the debuffer of the build, where you are hitting everything with massive debuffs, whether it's coming from Venator's Knife or from Time Rift, but you're also slowing enemies down, you're pausing them up in the sky, which again just makes it easier for your allies to shoot those enemies and to hit them with spells. And at the same time, what you're doing is you're creating these choke points where you put your slow trap down, and as long as your allies are in those slow traps with you, then they're 100% fine. Now, one major problem with this build is the fact that it deals a lot of damage over a massive area, and not so much a lot of damage to a single target. So as you can imagine, this build is exceptionally good at clearing expeditions, exceptionally good at moving through that content very fast without having to use hunter prey, without having to play very sweaty. But it is more difficult to actually clear heavy boss encounters like trials. Is it impossible to do it? No, not at all. It is definitely doable, but it makes those fights take really long. And I think there are probably ways in which you could change a few things up by maybe, you know, swapping one or two pieces out and, you know, accentuating temporal blade in here so that you could work that into the rotation. But for me at the moment right now, the game has become essentially something that I play and farm only in the expedition area. I have literally played trials to death. I have killed that second arbiter more times than I care to admit to myself, without having to go to fucking rehab. So at the moment right now, the way that I play the game, and especially the way that we play it on Thursday nights on stream, of course, is we just do expeditions. We try to do as many of these as possible as we can, and we just get through that. And for the foreseeable future, I think that's the way that I'm going to keep it. And this build is, for me, the preferred way in which I like to run the Trickster in those scenarios, because I don't want to be hyper sweaty, I don't want to fucking struggle, and I just kind of want to breeze through the content. So when it gets to the actual build itself, this build is all about the Trespasser set, baby. The point is that Trespasser set gives you so much additional damage to enemies that are affected by deception skills. And it also makes slow traps super sexy, meaning that when you have a when you have a slow trap deployed, you can't fucking die as long as you stay within that thing. Now we're going to do the same thing we always do. We're going to look at weapons first, then we're going to talk about armor and mods. We're going to talk about skills and rotation. We're going to look at the class tree. We're going to talk about the PAX choices that you should make for this build. And last but not least, I will be recommending some Ascension Points that you should be picking up firstly when you start out with this build. Now, of course, do ignore the transmog. This is using the Trespasser set, but I just use these transmogs to sort of keep track of all of my armor, because it is a shit show. So when we start off with our primary weapon, my idea here was to get a weapon that allows me to ramp and to take down bosses more effectively. This build has no problem with dealing with, you know, trash and low tier enemies, but in the case of captains, elites and bosses, you need to apply a little bit of additional pressure to them, and ramping up your deception skills further, including things like Time Rift and Venator's Blade, is just going to make that your abilities hit that much harder. So of course we have Sandstorm on here, we have Mage's Rage, and we have Fortress. Mage's Rage and Fortress are 2 ramp up mechanics, and even if you can't hit any crits, you could just with 1 or 2 crits you're going to get the additional damage there, but in 2 or 3 bursts you're going to engage your Fortress as well, which gives you additional survivability, and it gives you a nice damage boost as well. I like the idea of Sandstorm on this because the point is a lot of the times the things that you are throwing Venator's Knife at, the things that you are time rifting, are stuck in one place, or at least very slow in that place, which means the Sandstorm that spawns on top of them is going to get all that additional damage that it's going to take on them. Now I do use a reload mechanic gun on this build as well, and that of course is the Guillotine with Radiation Splash, Clip Combustion, and Moaning Winds on, which means that I have a one-stop shop for reload, switching to my shotgun, and essentially that, AoE damage deals to everything around me. And I often do this in cases of enemies that push through all of the damage that I'm pushing out and make it to my slow trap. Then I just do this rotation inside the slow trap as they're like, ooh, slow coming at me, and they fucking die. Other than that, you can also use it quite aggressively by hitting your abilities out, throwing something with a Time Rift, and when it's up in the sky, you run past it, you hit it with the combo, and that's all she wrote. Now, you can of course just use those 2 weapons. I do like to use the Torment and Agony on here as well, which has Violent Rupture and Firestorm on. This is just a great way for me to essentially dump a lot of additional damage onto enemies. So anything that is even chunkier or a little bit more difficult to kill, you just quickly switch out to your pistols and hit them with that, then hits them with the Violent Rupture, gives them quite a bit of damage from that, and then puts a Firestorm on top of them, which burns over time and just gives them a little bit more burn damage. Now, as mentioned, when we're looking at the armor here, we're going to start off with a headpiece, which is actually Ronin's Amigaza. Now, your important substats here are you want to have anomaly power as much as possible, because that's going to increase the damage of all of your damage skills. You also do want cooldown reduction because you want to have access to Venator's Blades out the ass. You want to be time rifting as soon as possible every time, and you also want to be able to protect yourself as much as possible with those slow traps. Status power on here really helps as well because it makes that slow and everything that your weapons, well, rather that your skills apply, makes those last longer. But you could absolutely put something like skills life leech on here if you wanted to get more HP from that, if you're struggling a little bit with survivability. Now, the name of the game when it comes to the mods is we want to be empowering our Venator's Knife, we want to be empowering our Time Rift, and then we also want to be empowering our own AP. So we have Arms and Anomaly on here, which combos very nicely with Mage's Rage. We are trying to get those crits already with Mage's Rage to be able to ramp up, so this is just going to be additional ramp up alongside that. Now, Boomerang Blades on here means that when we throw our Venator's Knife out, it hits 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 targets, and then it comes back again 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now, each time it does that, it applies its damage again, so you're basically double dipping in the damage, and that's really good, especially once you start ramping up, because what you have to remember is, as we're going to look at the set just now, we are dealing more damage against things that are affected by deception skills. So when you hit him that first pass with the Venator's Knife, that's going to affect them all by deception skill. So the pass back is actually going to hit for harder. Now, Anomaly Echo on here is just a fantastic way for us to also just ramp up our anomaly power even more. Our abilities, our skills are on such low cooldowns that we are able to capitalize from this like quite a lot. Then the chess piece and our first piece of Trespasser. So Trespasser has firepower on it as a stat. So we of course want to be stacking as much anomaly power as possible. So we actually want to get as little as possible Trespasser pieces in our first 3, in our headpiece, our chest piece, and our pants, because those are the ones that come with firepower on them. But at the same time, we also want to get as many pieces that we don't have dead mods. So it's kind of like a sweet spot that you're trying to settle on, but the main point is try to get as many pieces with anomaly power on them. And in the case of like having firepower on your gear, of course we try to supplement that with the ramp up that we get from Arms and Anomaly and Mage's Rage and things like that. We have Unstoppable Force on here because again we are using the combo where we turn armor piercing into resistance piercing and resistance piercing into, AP. So that works very well here. Again, we want to get as much anomaly power as possible because that will accentuate the damage from our abilities. Atomization here says that when enemies enter the slow trap, they become vulnerable. And so this is just another way for you to debuff enemies that actually make it through all of this shit that you're throwing out. And then last but not least on here, we have Captain Hunter, because we want to be dealing more damage against captains, elites, and bosses, as you know, trash is no problemo. Now, let's discuss the Trespasser set bonus here quickly, which says that it increases your damage by 5% per enemy affected by the deception skill. Additionally, players can't die inside slow trap. This means that when you start out combat, you're basically at your weakest. Once you start ramping up a bit and you get your first Venator's Knife out and everything like that, it means that your time rifts and your follow-up Venator's Knives are going to hit for far more damage. And that's really where this build starts mass clearing rooms. Now, the pants itself is actually a shield beast pants because we want to get that sweet ass anomaly power as mentioned. So here we have eager edges on, which gives us 2 more bounces on the Venator's Knife, which is nice. We have no resistance against the fortified on here because, again, that combo that I mentioned before. And we have move groove on here because we are trying to get as many sources of additional AP stacked onto this, because we lose some due to the fact that we had to take a firepower piece and all of that. So move groove fits in quite nicely here and gives us quite a bit of additional anomaly power just for moving around. So even if you are, you know, put your slow trap out and then you start casting your abilities, move around inside that thing, fucking dance, baby, because while you're doing that, you're going to be getting this boost. Then our Trespasser Talons is our second piece of Trespass on here. This has Pain Transfer on it, which is a debuff effect. Every time something is hit by Time Rift, it's 20% of the weapon damage and 20% of the anomaly damage dealt to one affected enemy will be transferred to other affected enemies. Now, this was unfortunately nerfed. This used to be a lot sexier, but it is what it is. So it's on here because we share our damage essentially between the enemies. A little bit of pain is ridiculously good on this build. And first of all, it's a fantastic way for you to lock down entire groups of enemies, because when you throw this at an entire row of enemies that are running at you, it'll lift them all up in the sky and it will kill them essentially in one cast. So you'll cast it on them, you'll see their health chunk down, and they'll just fucking die without you having to intervene. Now, the other reason why this is so good is as long as enemies are being affected by the skill, as long as it's ticking this damage on enemies, you are virtually unkillable. So if you are dealing with a situation where you're trying to move from one area of an expedition to another area and you're going to be under a lot of fire, it's a good idea to throw out the Time Rift, have it hit a bunch of enemies, and then relocate, then move. Remember that tricksters are kind of like a little bit fragile, and the point is that Hunt the Prey is a fantastic way for you to get around this fragility, but we don't have Hunt the Prey on this build, so we need to be able to protect ourselves, and this is one of the best ways to do that. Cut Them Deep is a phenomenal mod for Venator's Knife, probably one of the best mods for Venator's Knife, especially that came with Worldslayer. This basically says that enemies, or elites rather, marked by the knife receive 30% additional damage, which is good. Then when we go over to our last piece of Trespasser, it's our boots. On here we have long range for Time Rift, which makes the Time Rift itself actually reach much further back. I would say this would be super essential to actually have, because the point is by default Time Rift's distance is kind of, you know, shitty, and you want to be able to reach, you know, close to the back of the arena with one cast of Time Rift, which is phenomenal. Now we do have Weakening Zone on here, which is our second mod for slow traps. Now our slow trap also causes weakness. That means that anything that comes into the slow trap has got vulnerable and weakness on them, and it's fucking great. We have Hive Cut on here, which is another mod for Venator's Knife, which is kind of sexy. It says that damaging an enemy marked by the skill also activates the effect on other marked targets within 6 meter radius, dealing 50% of the initial damage. Now there's 2 ways for you to proc this. Actually, fuck it, there's 3. When you cast your Venator's Knife, now remember we have boomerang blades. So when you cast your Venator's Knife and it hits those first couple of enemies, and before it swings back, you can tag one of those enemies with a fucking gunshot, and if you kill it, then it's gonna ripple the damage through all of them. Or you can wait for the boomerang blades to come back on those guys, and the boomerang blades will trigger itself and also deal this Hive Cut damage. Or, and here's number 3, you can fucking fire a nice fat Time Rift through those guys, and the Time Rift will also proc that shit, and as soon as it kills one of them, and then the effect will ripple out through as well. Then when we go over to the skills and the rotation itself, as mentioned, this is all deception, baby. So we're going Venator's Knife, we're going Time Rift, and we're going Slow Trap. Fucking ridiculously low cooldowns on all 3 of these. So you can see all of them are below 5. with Venator's Knife and Slow Trap being close to 3, which is phenomenal. That means that you can cast this shit with impunity, just throw it as soon as it comes off cooldown and just keep spitting out these things. The way that I like to do it is as soon as I come into an area and I check, okay, cool, I'm going to deploy, I throw out my first Venator's Knife into one side, I throw out my Time Rift into another side, and then I try to see where the most enemy fire is coming down. If at any time during this time I feel my life being threatened or motherfuckers are coming too close up on me, I slow trap down, and that becomes like the area where I fight from. I throw out the next Venator's Knife, I throw out the next Time Rift, and usually it's one rotation murders everything around you. If there's something that's a little bit more spicy, like a Captain Elite or something like that, hit him up with the gun, ramp up your damage a little bit, and that second rotation will finish him off. If you want to be a speedy bastard, you want to run through the thing, you can do it alternatively. You can start out the room by running in Venator's Knife, Time Rift. You do both of those on top of the toughest enemy in the room. You run up to that toughest enemy in the room, and as they're still being suspended in the air or being slowed by Venator's Knife, you put the fucking slow trap down right on top of them, and you rotate out your shotgun and you deal all that damage to them, and that's going to murder them out as well. And then we get over to the class tree. Now this is some hyper bastardized version of a class tree right here, and I would say that this is probably the area of the build that I could spend a lot more time and kind of like really figuring out exactly the best way to path it. But the bottom line is this particular build does not actually benefit from any of these final capstones. Simply put, Altered Executioner and Cold Calculation, both of those increase your weapon and anomaly power based on enemies being in close range. This build's whole idea is to have enemies never get into close range, and those ones that do, you punish with a reload of the shotgun. So I kind of don't see this being very beneficial for us. Last but not least, Disruption Shield actually doesn't benefit us at all because it just gives more survivability, which is something that this build doesn't struggle with in the first place. So what we have left then is essentially trying to pick up as much anomaly power as possible and any potential ramp up boost that we can get from our skills, and then essentially just giving ourselves as much survivability, armor piercing and resistance piercing as we can get our hands on. So first and foremost, we put 2 points in the top here so we can get 10% of armor piercing there. Then we go down here, again picking up resistance piercing and anomaly power as we go along. We get ourselves anomaly scything because, again, if we want to rotate in like an anomaly, a melee, that's just going to increase our anomaly power by 30% as well. So again, you can essentially boost up your AP quite a bit. 30% is nothing to laugh at, and if you are diligent of the fact that you need to weave melee into your rotation. Then anomaly power some more here. We go down into counter shield, which says that activating your deception skills increases your anomaly power by 50% for 10 seconds. All 3 of your skills are deception skills, and all 3 of them are on less than 5-second cooldown, so you will have 100% uptime on this. Then we just continue on down here, and we stop essentially at this last node of concentration here. Then we go up here, we get Wither Scything, which means that our melee will also inflict weakness on you. Not such a big deal, but it's okay. And again here now what we're doing is we're just picking up additional survivability here. This makes the weakness that much more effective that you're putting on enemies. We also get ourselves some max health, some resistance here. We give ourselves some more cooldown reduction even, and we just get some more armor, and we essentially make that our shields degrade less over time by 30%. Again, like I said, it's unfortunate that there's no real capstone that we can definitely benefit from. You could go all the way into Altered Executioner, for instance, and then kind of play the build in a different way where you let far more enemies come into close range, or play the build far more aggressive where you're running in between enemies the whole time. But it kind of defeats the idea that I had for this build from the beginning, because essentially I wanted to be this like long range spellcaster and just hurling my skills all over the fucking map. So when we go over to the PAX trees itself, of course we're going to be going bottom tree. We're going to be picking up Trigger Man, which is just 15% additional damage for each skill that's on cooldown. We're going to be getting Lies Deception, which says that every time while activating deception skills grants you 15% shield every 1 second for 4 seconds. Again, all of your skills are deception skills, so you're always going to be benefiting from this additional shield. We're getting Failsafe Protocols, where in the chance that you actually dip and there's a fucking problem, this is going to give you damage mitigation. Then we get Goals Beyond Understanding, which says that damage done to elites tagged with deception skills has 25% chance to be increased by 200%. This means that every once in a while you'll notice like your shots that you shoot, or a rotation from a shotgun or something like that, will just instantly vaporize something that you thought was tough, and that's actually when this procs. And then last but not least, Meticulous Schema says that 200% of killing damage on enemies tagged with deception skills is divided amongst other tagged enemies. Now this is what makes Venator's Knife perform so well in this situation here, because a lot of the times, by being smart with what you shoot, you can throw a Venator's Knife, and when it hits on the side and carries its way through, shoot something that is near death, and that's actually gonna, you know, take the damage that you've dealt to that thing that's near death, and it's going to share it with all of the other things that are still alive. Now this works particularly well if you're actually able to cycle you know, for instance, the shotgun damage onto a small enemy, thereby, you know, fucking blasting them off the planet, and then have all that overkill damage essentially shared between all of the other enemies that are still alive. This is a great way for you to deal damage against elites by killing like a trash mob that's standing next to them, as long as all of them are affected by deception. Then with the Ascension Points itself, absolutely anomaly power is where you want to go. You want to put your first 10 points into anomaly damage, your next 10 points into anomaly power, then you want to put some points into resistance pierce and armor pierce, because that's going to increase overall your AP. And then some cooldown reduction is always a good idea, as is, you know, more damage against elites as well as less damage from them. If you struggle with survivability for any reason whatsoever here, obviously pick yourself up some health and armor, but generally speaking, playing around with slow trap and making sure that with the difficult parts of an expedition, the difficult parts of an area, that you're within a slow trap, or you have your time rifts out and everything like that. Generally speaking, there should be no way that you should fear death in any way or form with this build. And that right there is it for the build as well as the video. Thank you so much for watching, especially if you made it this far. Let me know in the comments down below if you played the old vanilla version of this build. I know that quite a few people on the Discord as well as the streams have been asking, when am I updating the slow trap deception trickster? So I'm glad that I was finally able to bring it to the channel. But more importantly, I'm actually happy with how it's performing. Again, like I said, I don't want to play Firepower Trickster. While it is ridiculously powerful, is one of my least favorite ways of playing the game, just due to the fact of how much, first of all, I would say skill it takes and how much concentration it takes. So I really take my hat off to anybody that constantly plays the game that way. If that's your, you know, thing, then fucking great, and have fun with that. But I do always want to, as I've mentioned, turn all of my classes into pyromancers essentially. I think this is the most pyromancer trickster you fucking get. But that's it. Let me know what you would do to change this, and if you've tried this out, if you're planning on trying it out. But most importantly, it's just super important to me that you have a fantastic morning, afternoon, and evening wherever you are in the world. And until next video, fucking cheers.
They want the best of me now, best of me now, best of me now, best of me. They want the best of me now, best of me now, best of me now, best of me.